Hey, friends of the earth, this is Waylon. Sorry, I was just getting my mug. We have a rooster today. I'm here with another great guest. We're doing weekly, bi-weekly conversations with people I connect with on Instagram, etc., people I admire, people who are adding something, showing us the way, adding something to our lives. Today, I'm very excited about this guest because she touches, I think, just about every single day on she has a way of talking about stuff that we're all obsessed and thinking about all the time: relationships, our relationship with ourself, commitment, dating culture. And she brings some real wisdom to it. I grew up Buddhist, and I was trained to, just by force of practice, to know the sound of truth when I hear it. Truth is usually not quite what you expect, but it's got a little bit of it's coming from a different angle. It's coming from left field a little bit. So, without further ado, if she has requested to join, let's roll the red carpet out.
Yay, we made it.
You're a human being.
I'm real. I'm definitely real.
Wow.
And so are you.
Yeah, well, we're not sure about that, but mostly. Yeah. As you and I were just discussing, I feel often like I'm a walking to-do list. Yeah.
I definitely resonate with that right now, very much so.
So your name is Ailey Jolie. Am I saying that right?
Absolutely correct, yes.
Okay, good. Tell me a little bit, or all of us, kind of what it is you do and how did you come to do this?
Yeah, so I am working as a psychotherapist. My practice is pretty much split 50-50, working with men and women, which is such an absolute treat, and I love that. And my career as a psychotherapist has really had lots of evolution. I started actually working with male sex offenders, then worked really heavily in eating disorders, then worked really heavily with trauma. And then the evolution of that and the evolution of my clients really led me to the place of relationship and really understanding that most ruptures and most harm happens in intimate connection. And so if we are to repair that or restore or gain a sense of resiliency, it's our relationships that are really going to signify that and have to change for our life to change as well.
Oof, I feel like we could hang up right now. That was so good. Most of what did you say? Most of our ruptures or our trauma, whatever it is, forget how you say it.
Intimate connection.
Yeah. Arise from intimate connections or our most important relationships. Or, wow. That's so true. So how is it that you began to sort of share, I publish Elephant Journal. I'm surrounded by people sharing great stuff and their personal hard-won wisdom from their life. And honestly, a lot of it I'm kind of jaded to or critical of. But I don't know if you caught the intro, I feel like a lot of your stuff is surprising, but also very simple, but also very true in a way that I hadn't thought about it in that way. And that's not flattery, that's hard fact.
Thank you. That has a lot of weight because I know you read a lot and read a lot of writers and come across a lot of voices. And I heard the intro and you described this motion with your hand. And I found that so interesting because when I am taking on a new client, that is something I actually describe in my approach, is that I am quite blunt and I am quite edgy. And I would rather say the thing and you hear it, and maybe it's too hard for you to hear and too hard for you to hold and you go away, but at least I know I've said it. And I think that I don't actually say anything that edgy or that blunt. It comes from this different place, as you named kind of the Buddhist place, and I've spent a lot of time in silent meditation, so I understand here the difference in truth, and I think that's the place I constantly try and write from. I don't sit down and go, what do I think that people want? I'm like, what do I need to hear, or what do I wish my client could have just heard me say, but they couldn't hear it, but I can write it.
That's so powerful. I feel like you deliver it in such a way that it can be received. So I guess my question is, I'm a basketball basketball fan. I don't know if anyone else is here, but Charles Barkley is, a Hall of Famer. He now has a huge TV career. And he started out and he said, when I first started being on TV, talking about basketball, I had to make a decision. Did I want to be liked, or did I want to share what I actually thought? And he obviously made the hard choice, and he lost real friendships because of it. He was best friends with Michael Jordan, who I'm sure you've heard of. So without getting too into that, it does seem like a rare choice, and it's easy to applaud it in an Instagram live. But I mean, I've read, at least one thing that I mildly disagreed with you. So how do you make your kind of, your bluntness well received, or do you not worry about that?
Sometimes I worry about it because I want to be receptive, and I want to hear, and I want to learn. And if I get it wrong, or people disagree, I'm like, oh, like, tell me, like, I want to learn, like, I'm curious.
Right. Some dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. But the bluntness, it's not something I overly worry about, because inside of my system, and when I'm trying to write, I'm trying to hold that duality of like both and. So even though it sounds blunt, there's still this softness there, and this compassion, and it can go into the other place, and both truths can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's like, I love writing that does that. I think that's something I personally really enjoy, is when someone can hold the nuance and the kind of bitter sweetness of things.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I actually have a huge, my phone is set on a whole bunch of books of mine, and one of them is Byron, and the Romantics had a saying that said, something like, the definition of an educated mind is the ability to keep two opposing truths in mind at the same time.
Yes.
So without blowing further smoke in your direction, applause, but I am a fan, and I hate being a fan of people. I like being an equal, having a human relationship, but I genuinely appreciate, I'm coming out of a breakup like 6 months ago, and I think your account is, along with Buddhism for me, has been really helpful. And the first thing, and I had to go back to see when I first messaged you, that really caught my attention is you wrote about, and I don't know if you remember this, I just sent it to you, but you wrote about, do you have, what was it? Do you have a anxious
style, or are you in an emotionally avoidant culture?
Yeah. So can you say that one more time?
Yeah. Do you actually have an anxious attachment style, or are you in a emotionally avoidant culture?
Right. Dating culture. So I love that. So, in my comment, I said both, ? So what were you getting at? You went on to say a lot more there.
Yeah. So many of my clients will come in and they're like, I was like scrolling their social media, and I'm like checking my phone all the time, and I'm compulsively doing this, and I'm worried about da-da-da. And they come in and they are in a state of anxiety. That is like absolutely real. But when I slow them down, or give them the invitation to slow down and be there with me, and like actually walk through what is happening, I'm like, all of that sounds absolutely reasonable that you feel like this. This person that you're in intimate relationship with isn't communicating. You don't know how they feel. They're inconsistent. They're here one moment, gone the other. Like, actions and words are in totally different playing fields, and you don't know where you are in your relationship. Anyone who doesn't know where they are in proximity to someone else they really care about is gonna have a startle response. And that's not like to shame the other person who's potentially being avoidant. It's also really honoring that we live in a culture that supports that and doesn't teach us those emotional skills to show up and be consistent or treat people in these ways. And we have like societal things that are kind of systematically like undermining our ability to be emotionally open in our dating world. I mean, there are people who are doing it, and there's a force for us to not be as well.
Yeah, I wonder what you think about, and there's some good questions in there, what you think about, because I've jumped back into this dating culture after not having really been in it for a while. And obviously, I think the apps are kind of playing on the culture that they wanted to make money off of, but they're also kind of exacerbating the existing culture of like, you know, superficial judgment, superficial judgment, superficial judgment. We're so fast about it now. And it's not all evil. I think, you know, it's an easy thing to bash on dating apps, but, you know, we need to take some responsibility. But how do we change the dating culture overall? I know I had an ex-girlfriend who, when we first started dating, I was sort of like, you know, being cool, like, you know, texting back or whatever when there'd been enough time that had passed. And she saw me and she said, I don't know what's going on with your communication, but if you're trying to be cool, there's no need. Just stop it. Just text me as soon as you get my text, or if you're in a meeting, no worries. I just don't want to have to think about it. And I was like, oh my God, I love this person. And I immediately relaxed into an adult relationship with this woman. But that's rare. So how do we kind of actually kind of maybe put statements out like she did into our culture and change the culture for a little bit less insecure and avoidant?
Yeah. When I love that example, and when you were sharing it, what like came to my mind was just how in connection she was with herself. Like she wanted, she knew what she needed. She knew maybe her shadow parts that tried to be cool in the past, and she was like, I'm going to call you on this. And I might be right, I might be wrong, but I know that when I do these behaviors, that's what's coming up for me, and this is what I want. And so one of the why I love relational work is because, yes, we can explore it in dating and romance and friends and this, that, but it's actually all about how we relate to our own parts and our own self. And I think if we are to have dating culture shift, there needs to be a conversation around like how we connect to ourselves, how we feel a sense of worthiness, how we have a sense of value, and more kind of honesty with us first. Because if we want something out there, we have to know what it is, we have to be able to communicate it, we have to know what our needs are. And I kind of constantly go back to that place of like, how are you like dating yourself or taking care of yourself? Like, what does that look like?
I'm loving it. I'm lapping this up. So in Buddhism, we call this Maitri. You might have read about it, Metta or Maitri. So I was actually thinking about that, about you, when I was asking you, you know, how do you make sort of tough wisdom sometimes that may go against the grain of what we're doing? How do you ensure there isn't a defensive reaction or that it's receptive? And of course, you can't control the reaction, but you do land it, feels like, pretty well. And I was thinking, you know, you must have done the hard work of making friends with yourself around this. And, you know, this is my department. I should be an expert at it, but I'm still working on this stuff all the time. Like when I'm talking about climate change or, you know, politics, and our own readers are saying, F you, we're unfollowing you. You know, there's a part of me that I get tired of talking about tough subjects, and I feel bad about talking about tough things, but I'm still going to do it. But if I made better friends with myself, kind of like you, I think I wouldn't even have that I wouldn't have that heavy kind of guilt tripping of myself, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it really also depends, like, what's being kind of tossed your way. And I say this, actually, I was going to say knock on wood, but I don't feel like I need to.
Yeah.
I've been pretty blessed in the social media space for that to always come through and to not have kind of really intense negative criticism or feedback pushing. And when I've been like really receptive to it. And so I think that what you're is that landing, it does have something to do with maybe how I hold my internal world, and the fact that I like really honor, like I've got some like very messy, shadowy like stuff that I like work very hard to know and befriend and not judge and like integrate into the rest of my life, because I've got, you know, I'm a human.
So let's say all, you know, the 72 people are here right now, everyone was one person, and we were sitting in front of you getting, you know, I'm just trying to get free psychotherapy out of you. And we said, you know, how do we do that tough work of making friends with ourselves? Because there's a lot of bad advice out there. You know, the whole, I don't know how you feel about affirmations, but from a Buddhist point of view, there's a lot of like, I want to get away from how I'm feeling, which is ucky, and I want to feel positive. And while that's totally understandable, Maitri at least works in the opposite way. You actually look in and have compassion for the mud, and then out of the mud can come the lotus, right? Instead of trying to get away into what we call spiritual materialism. But maybe you disagree with that. So what would your advice be?
No, I actually really agree with that. I think my time in silence has distilled that a lot. I think one of the ways to kind of get to know your shadow or understand those parts of you that maybe don't align with your authenticity or your values or who you want to be in the world or who you think you should be in the world, is really honoring that those parts of you exist for a reason. Like when I look back at my history and think of the things that I did in relationship that were really out of my value systems and weren't aligned, it's like I did those things because I didn't know how to communicate. I wanted this to end. This wasn't the right person. I wanted to be single. And instead of just owning that, I was like, well, I'll just be kind of like my shadow self and like go party till 3 a.m. and not call for a week and like, oh, you dumped me. Sorry.
Right.
Like, that's not, I wouldn't advocate for that, but I understand that part
You're
of
not
it.
a fan of ghosting.
You know, like, if that's the strategy you need for your evolution, then I guess that's what it is at this point. But can we work towards that in another way?
Yeah.
And hold that vision of it being protective and the best you knew at that time. And I know people take issue to that statement of like they were doing the best they could, but I genuinely do believe that even when it's really misguided.
It's good stuff. So, you know, just in terms of ghosting specifically, which is, you sort of described it in a more human way instead of a pejorative way, because we all hate ghosting, but we all kind of do it. How do you, as we grow up, how do you encourage us to have those tough conversations? Like, maybe you're not the right person, I don't want to be dating you, instead of just going and partying until 3 a.m. and kind of like waiting for them to leave, basically.
The question I ask myself is like, who do you want to be remembered as? If you know that this relationship is not going to last, how do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as the girl who is partying till 3 a.m. or do you want to be remembered for having the difficult conversation? Or, you know, maybe you've tried to do that 7 times and it didn't work and you're like, okay, I'm going to send that text message or do that voice note and then I'm going to make it really clear. And that's what I often ask myself is like, how do I want to be remembered when this relationship ends? Right.
And nothing's wrong with the 3 a.m. thing. The problem there is like that you're avoiding the, you know, having an unpleasant moment.
Yeah. They're probably not going to remember me so fondly.
Right. Exactly. And then you just almost casually quickly mentioned a very interesting point to ghosting, which is, a lot of the times we avoid that tough conversation because we've actually, to be fair, tried to have it.
Yes.
But the person is running for the hills whenever anything tough comes up, or they're just not reacting. So, you know, my basic question coming out of my last relationship, which was wonderful, it was loving, it was respectful, it was kind, it was fun, the values were there, but communication was like, so when you feel like, I always said I felt like I was playing, and none of this is meant as a diss, like respect, but you know, some people aren't right for each other, and I felt like I was playing ping pong, like with the cosmos, and I would like hit the ping pong ball of communication, and like, and I'd be out there like in my spacesuit, like just waiting for the ball to come back, and it would, you know, how do you communicate? And if the answer is you can't, which is a little bit what I learned, how do you communicate with someone who maybe doesn't feel comfortable communicating in the same way, to try to put it in a fair way? Yeah,
I'm having the laughter because I definitely.
Yeah, you're allowed.
That's what I was saying. I was like, I don't understand. Like, how did this?
Yeah.
And for me, it was just this surrendering of like, I'm probably never going to get what I want here, or I'm never going to have the conversations that I feel are necessary. So what do I need to say? And what do I need them to know was actually a more important question for me, of like, I'm not going to get that conversation. I'm not going to have that da-da-da. So like, what do I just need them to know? And in my mind, in that situation, it was like, I need them to know that it's okay to communicate. I need them to know that I care. I need them to know that this doesn't work for me, and that, you know, if they ever want to have this conversation, at least my present moment state is like super keen to do that, and that I want to be in that, a part of that evolution for their communication and growth. But it's actually not what I want anymore. I don't want to be in the cosmos with my spacesuit on. I'm running out of oxygen.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you took that analogy farther in a very accurate way. Yeah, so helpful. You're so good. I'm so impressed. Yeah. What else should we discuss? Because I don't want to let you go yet. There's so many good issues. What's on your mind right now that would be helpful for people to consider? Maybe something you wrote about today or yesterday.
What mostly has been like marinating in my mind is really, and I touched on it a little bit, and it's kind of like places I'm exploring, this concept of how masculinity isn't toxic, but masculinity is traumatized, and like really pulling that apart, working with a lot of men and working with women, and just hearing the duality of their relational experiences, and getting to sit with men and be like, oh wow, like he's genuinely learning how to do this. And then I'm like working with women and they're like frustrated that he's like not doing the thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, these are two different realities and somehow they're in one.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how that's happening. So that's
like if you could just get everyone in the room together and moderate it.
Somehow. I don't know. Yeah. So that's something that's been on my mind lately.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so helpful. I think we, you know, the whole toxic masculinity thing is like, we put that in a title of an article and it becomes popular instantly. And then you try to talk about like, how do you, you know, engage empathy, or is vulnerability to true strength, things like that. And those articles, no one reads those articles. So it's almost like, you know, and well-deserved. I get that the toxic patriarchy has been a, you know, had the run of the table in a pretty negative way in a lot of ways for centuries. But how do we kind of shift that conversation so that men can begin, and their parents of boys can begin investing, you know, in kindness as strength instead of whatever, being tough and idiots, you know?
Yeah, I mean, in reference to parents, I have no idea. That's not an experience I've embarked on yet.
Yeah.
But where I have been playing like a lot lately, and this I imagine like maybe plays into your readers and who's engaging with your content, is like, how do we create spaces for women to feel safe, to potentially explore how they're complicit in patriarchy, or places that they maybe have internalized misogyny, internalized sexism.
Right.
And how doing that work has the biggest potential for change for everyone. And that's a conversation that I'm constantly like in my mind spinning about, because I know my experience of men really, really changed when I started to look at how just like the sea of patriarchy or my experiences of sexualized violence, how they were still inside of me and they were still motivating my relational choices and the places I went and the beliefs I had and this idealistic version of feminism that I held. And I was like, you know, and how it was actually when I started to like be really honest with myself about how I might be complicit in participating in these things I don't believe in and these exact things that have harmed me, that's when things started to change. And so, yeah, that's kind of where my mind goes.
Well said. I think, you know, it's not always easy for me as a man to say that, but I think, you know, for the first time in my life after my breakup, I watched some dating shows, and they are obviously, like dating apps, not an accurate representation of humanity. And yet, the men chosen for these shows and how they're represented based on how big their, muscles are and how tough they are, and often how manipulative and aggressive they are. And then the women chosen, it really felt like both genders, and number one, it was all heteronormative, everything I saw. But number two, that they all were completely buying into the same patriarchy, this toxic patriarchy. And I like to specify toxic because I think just like matriarchy, there's a place for a positive patriarchy. That the problem isn't men, the problem is the toxic patriarchy, and we all can buy into that. You said your idealized view of feminism. What do you mean by that? That's interesting.
Yeah. I love I want to thank you for the language, toxic patriarchy. Thank you. I'm going to take that. Yeah, I definitely can acknowledge I had a very idealistic view of feminism, and I definitely went down every feminist trope that you could live. I've probably lived cut off my hair and chanted things and did this stuff.
Right.
And so when I think of idealized feminism, I often use this example of there's such a momentum, and I love the momentum, so I don't want to discredit it. But we should, as women, be safe enough to go out in the world and wear whatever and do whatever and not experience sexualized violence. But when we break that down, it's do we hold for any other gender that they should be able to go out into the world and not experience harm? Is that actually in our reality as it is right now, is that actually a statement that makes sense with the world we live in right now? And when I break that down, I'm no, not really.
Yeah. Meaning what's the conclusion? You have to be prepared for bullshit and, aggression and projection, and
more that the world is inherently unsafe. And we are not as powerful to have complete control over our surroundings and our environment as we would maybe like to believe that we are. And then there's a little bit of okay, if I'm not that all powerful, I can't actually manufacture my complete safety at all times. What does that mean for my life?
And what does it?
I don't know. That's actually a personal question.
Yeah. I mean, elephant has been a journey for me because, we've been around 20 years now, which is insane. And I live here in Boulder, Colorado, and it's a big college town. It's often named top party school, CU. Someone said go Buffs earlier. Top party school. What that does mean is there's a lot of underage sort of unsanctioned drinking, not to sound like an adult, but drinking that isn't even happening in a club where there's bouncers or there's any kind of light shining into what's happening. And we have a lot of rape in Boulder. And many years ago, probably 15 years, I don't even know when, 12 years ago, I wrote an article about I was just really shocked at a rape that had happened in my neighborhood. And I wrote just, a light discussion here with Waylon and Ailey. But, I wrote all these things these protections or these things you can do, go with a friend, guard your drink, all this kind of common sense stuff. And I got overwhelming pushback and criticism. I'm a guy saying, hey, women, here's how you can be safer from guys. So I get it. And I learned a lot. But at the same time, to your point, is sort of I think it's a Muslim aphorism, trust in God, but tie your camel up as well, because your camel could wander off. We do need to be prepared for a world that can be awful, right?
It's that both and.
Yeah.
That whole absolutely no one deserves to be sexually assaulted regardless.
No, and you're not asking for it, and it shouldn't be on you to prepare against it.
That is the truth. And a second truth is that we live in a world where sexual assault happens. And it happens a lot.
A lot.
When we least expect it. And so knowing, acknowledging that those are both true, how do I move through the world? And that is some of the toughest work that I've ever had to do for myself and my own psychotherapy, being someone who has extensive history of sexualized violence, and some of the toughest work I've had to kind of support my clients through is grappling and holding those both truths of like, you absolutely do not deserve what happened to you, and no one does. And inherently in this world, you're unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on that cheerful note, no, I appreciate that. I think, you know, it's still in a way not for me to say, but, you know, you want to give good advice to people. You want people to be safe and take precautions that they can, you know. But so how do you, you're seeing clients most days as you work. So how do you, you know, this is such a cliche question, but I love it. How do you then at the end of the day, you know, take care of yourself? Do you go see a psychotherapist yourself? Do you meditate? You exercise? What do you do to make sure because you're taking on a lot, obviously.
Yeah. I have amazing supervisors, amazing psychotherapists I work with, a meditation practice I love, really good movement practice. But the thing that I actually love the most, and it's going to sound super weird if anyone has been to London, I live in Soho, like right in the heart, central London. And at around like 6 a.m., 6:30 in the morning, I go out to Trafalgar Square, which is like at the night, there's like thousands of people. Like you can't actually even walk through there without like feeling like you're being cuddled. But in the morning, when you go there around 6:30 in the morning, there's absolutely no one there. And it is where I sit and do my meditation practice and journal and kind of like write out everything that I've heard the day before that's still with me. And then I let it go. I just like throw out the piece of paper in the garbage and then move on.
Wow.
And I love it so much because there's something for me energetically just really interesting about this space that has such high volume. And then it's just.
Yeah. Yeah. So. I love that. Yeah. That reminds me in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition of sand mandalas. Do you know about them?
Yes, briefly, yeah.
So all these monks with these like little precise sort of like making icing on cakes, make these this very intricate kind of mathematical design of sacred geometry and enlightenment and all this. And it has tons of meaning to it. And they work on it for weeks. And then when they're done, they just let it go. They just sweep away it's like priceless, beautiful art, you know, that people would pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for, and they just sweep it often into the sea because it's used or the river. And I love your practice of writing. You mentioned there that you're letting go of the writing. So then the writing becomes even more than putting it in a drawer or a journal. It becomes 100% genuine for yourself in that moment.
It's all of this stuff that I oftentimes wish I could have said, or the words that they have said to me that are still looping in my mind. And it's just like, I just need to let it go. And sometimes it will circle back to me 2 weeks later. I'll be writing something. I'm like, oh yeah, that's that thing that I was like really fixated on that morning. Here it is again. But it feels really important that I just let it go, that nothing happens with it. It's just my time to be with my own voice.
I love that. Such a good takeaway for folks, I hope. Give some hearts for Ailey, if so, just to play the Instagram game. Because I think I'm doing our social media today, and I was literally like an hour ago sharing an article on morning routines and meditation and blah, blah, blah. And I feel like that's like almost a secret recipe. If you want to make one 15-minute change in your day, and I'm speaking personally because it's so easy to say this in a trite way, you know, keeping that phone, I keep my phone a couple rooms away, and I try to read or meditate first. Instead of losing an hour or whatever on our Instagram or whatever it is, and you don't even know what you're doing. You're like, blah, blah, you know, and it's kind of good, but, you know, it's stuff you enjoy, but a little bit like a baby looking at a mobile. Instead, you know, some of that meditation, a little walk to go get your coffee, whatever it is, nature, meditation. For me, stretching is also in there. So good, so helpful. Because I do think, you know, for, you know, psychotherapists, massage therapists, teachers, there's certain like classes of professions and people who are taking on a lot of the suffering, and there's so much suffering.
Yeah, definitely. spent a lot of time like in suffering and pain with people,
Right.
and now I'm
Right.
in a place where that still exists, but I'm doing a little bit different work, it's been really, it's a treat. It's a real delight.
Well, this was a treat and a delight. So good to connect.
Yes.
I think after I asked you to do the video, eventually we realized, my staff and me, or maybe you pointed out that you'd written on elephant.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we go back, very loosely, a couple years, and I look forward to following your work.
Yeah.
And if you write a book, I will buy it and read it and have you back on. That would be amazing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. It was so lovely to meet you.
Likewise. Thank you from all of us to Ailey Jolie. Please go follow her if you're not already. And yeah, I'd love to have you back sometime.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Okay, everyone. So we're doing these weekly. Just click on your notifications to make sure you get the videos. You don't have to watch them all. But if it's someone you're interested in, if someone you're, challenged by, you might enjoy them. We're having amazing people on. I'm starting to do a couple week. And we have the podcast, we have the video series. I've interviewed now thousands of people. I don't think I'm necessarily great at it, so thank you for your patience, but I am genuinely, I care and I'm interested, and I'm happy to ask, hopefully, some good questions and tough questions. So big love. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.